In 2009, I started my channel under the name of Art Rant, and I described it as random and spontaneous insights from the studio by the artist. And I want to elaborate on that. What is that sort of descriptor that I used at the time? The spontaneous and random insights, which I think is important because the people, and I want to thank all the people that came out to my show out of the blue and bought the paintings. I'm very grateful. I want to thank people that came, and especially those that bought paintings. And I feel very good about this show, and I'm reflecting on what it is in my own life that I've understood through the work that I'm doing. And I want to fill people, some of the people that see and understand or have some kind of connection to the work that I'm doing in terms of my paintings. I'm going to call this bumps and valleys work. It's like bumps and valleys, bumps and valleys. It's a very simple kind of understanding of what it is that I did or what I was doing, what I am doing. And it connects in a very specific way to art history. And people that have been following me is I'm not just producing idiosyncratic stuff that, I don't know, there's sort of like a doodle, people doodle, and you can create images from the top of your head, which is nice, you know, spontaneous, random sort of, yeah. But I feel myself very connected to an extended history. Like we all have some kind of connection, what different people like to call the source or the mystery. And my reflections on this after having done this show, I realized I was working in bumps and valleys, a series of paintings that are bumps and valleys. And if you got one of my paintings, they're bumps and valleys. And I'll explain that because if you look at anyone that creates an image on a two-dimensional surface, until you reach, with a few aberrations, until you reach, let's say, the 20th century, where you have conceptual aspects of producing an artwork being also important. For example, Frank Stella, in his protractor paintings, or even prior to that, his slogan was, "What you see is what you see." And he was not creating an illusionistic space, but 99% of all art produced on a surface, on a two-dimensional surface, is illusionistic space. And my version of illusionistic space is called bumps and valleys. So illusionistic space is something that comes towards you and something that recedes from you. So you basically look at a painting from a kind of almost archetypal perception that separates our understanding into the most simplest forms, bumps and valleys. And of course, the Renaissance exalted this idea of bumps and valleys with the mathematical formulas created around perspective and the idea of perspective, which was something that artists prior also understood but had no interest in, which is why I like Giotto, Cimabue, or Masaccio, people that came prior, just prior, even to some extent Van Eyck. But the idea that we reduce things into a kind of simplicity is something that attracts most people to artists. It doesn't maybe make sense because a lot of art seems very involved and complicated and in depth, and you wonder, well, what is being said? But simplistically speaking, anything that is produced on a two-dimensional surface will 99% of the time be bumps and valleys. So what I'm saying to you is, intuitively, I understood in this works, in these paintings, in these out of the blue Pacific paintings, that it's kind of like, in a sense, out of the blue is black and white, bumps and valleys. And emotionally speaking, the black and white of this is we're in the fight for our lives. This is something that is underneath everything that I'm producing in the last 5 years since Fukushima blew up. And I'm just going to give a couple of more random and spontaneous insights I have having done these paintings, that I have concluded, I have understood that it's incredibly important, it's amazingly important to do the work that comes from the heart, to do the work, as I have always referred to, the idea that, not just the idea, that we practice our caring in a day-to-day way. And when you have detractors, people that are drawing you in to their anger and their diversions, their diversionary tactics to remove us from this heart center. In a sense, if you look at the greatest casualties in societies worldwide is from heartbreak. It's called coronary disease. It's actually heartbreak. The greatest affliction for humanity is dying from heart disease, coronary disease, which is heartbreak. People are dying from heartbreak because their energy is extracted, and the hopelessness with which people exist, and it has surrogates. I mean, we can replace our aspirations and those heart desires with a lot of different diversions and money and fame, glory, gratifications, whichever way they might be. But ultimately, we come back to this fundamental notion of ourselves as working from our heart centers, which is what I feel when I make my work that matters, comes from this center that cares, that I express my heart. I do not want to die of heartbreak and the attacks that people endure from the attack dogs that are out there. And I will not engage with these people. What it is that we're facing is to have this fundamental, what I feel is like we need a revolution here. And the revolution now, I'm gonna tie this into what I perceive of as being what people call fear mongering or fear porn. And the fear porn, I've been contacted many times and said that my Fukushima concerns are fear porn. And I'll tell you what is fear porn. And that is, we're facing a third world war of a nuclear exchange. It's never going to happen, people. It's never going to happen. I'm going to tell you, it's never going to happen. The nuclear exchange that everybody is sitting on pins and needles, it's not going to happen. But that's not even the good news. It's even worse than that. And here's well, no, I shouldn't say worse than that, because a nuclear exchange, to the extent that there are tens of thousands of nuclear warheads pointed at everything that exists on this planet, all life on this planet, no, that's pretty bad. But what I say is, my intuition, my spontaneous and random insight is that it's not going to happen. But what will happen is what we're seeing, the disintegration of nation states. And I think this is being facilitated with what we see in the US, the Trump-Hillary dichotomy. They're the same kind of story, basically, which is to divide nations. And the division of nations means insurrection and civil war. We will be in a state of a global civil war. Not a nuclear war, but a global civil war, where people feel themselves to be so outraged by the lies and deceptions, and primarily the lies and deception about the toxicities being released into our environment that threaten all life on this planet. It is the greatest lie ever told. The fact that nuclear radiation is totally saturating this planet, and it doesn't immediately affect you or me, as we are experiencing life still on a level of being able to experience with some joy and pleasure, because ultimately we want to be part of something that makes us feel good. So we focus on all that which makes us feel good, which is great. Feel good, feel happy. But if you ignore this, it will come back to bite you in the ass. It's like anything. To be healthy means to be proactive towards being healthy. And we are not, as a human race, being healthy by destroying the environment. It just doesn't work that way. It's going to bite us in the ass. The dreaded red, but don't be afraid. So my conclusion, my insight, my spontaneous insight is that this pain and suffering, which is the blueprint of this evolution of our being, that pain and suffering, which is nothing new. If you look at all of recorded history, you have basically a history of pain and suffering. And we are diverted from this understanding by saying, oh, the highlights is that, we can still have some kind of vestige of feeling pleasure on some level, but pleasure in the sense that is narcissistic. And narcissism is that which obscures the pain and the suffering we're actually feeling. Narcissism obscures or covers the pain that we're actually feeling. And every person is feeling it because why? Because I know hearts are being broken. Hearts are being broken on an epic scale. Heart disease is off the charts. This is the WHO, the World Unhealthy Organization, has concluded that heart disease is the biggest killer on the planet. And the biggest killer will be cancer after heart disease. Of course, cesium attacks our heart, our pulmonary muscles. Cesium, the reason we have heart disease also is because of the cesium from nuclear reactors that is perpetrated against all hearts on this planet. What's my point? Well, I'm going to finish this off. And what I want to say is that we need to focus on the solutions, and the solutions need to come out of our greatest desperation, and that is our hearts are being broken. And how do we preserve our hearts? And that is by caring and not going into the seductions that take us away from understanding this. We're told that hearts are breaking. We're told openly the biggest killer on the planet are people dying of heart attacks and heart disease, of broken hearts. And I'm telling you, the solution is to care. And I've tied this into my own notion of this, is to produce art, produce work that is fundamentally, it is carried by this notion. All my work and my bumps and valleys as it applies to art history. And curators or critics can, after the fact, they will understand this. I'm telling you now, I am tied into a very big family through my attachment, through my desire to be connected to something larger than myself. And I, for lack of a better word, I'll call it art history. And I have defined in these paintings the fundamental notion of creating a feeling of, on a two-dimensional surface, that radically defines, outside of the 1% of conceptual artists that work on a surface like Barnett Newman, for example. He wouldn't call himself a conceptual artist. Or someone like Frank Stella in his first paintings, and Agnes Martin, and there are many different ones actually, Ellsworth Kelly, that have the notion that we are functioning within the bumps and valleys on a two-dimensional surface. And I'm going to leave it here because you can fill in the blanks on this, because I can go on in terms of my own imagination and my insights on this, but I want people to know that I will not be deterred from letting you know that what really matters is the heart. And the heart means to care, which I've said all along. And how we're going to find solutions is by implementing this understanding and this knowledge.